And what I did that day was I was planning to say more, but I said a lot less. But unfortunately, that was probably not the best place to edit, because Lynley, it was a sensitive subject, and I didn't explain exactly how it all went. So to her, it was like, oh, he's painting himself out to be a better person than he is. Recently, we had about 40 student ministry leaders here to Lifeway Headquarters to do a conference. They brought a message, they shared it with one another, got feedback, which is one of the most humbling things to do. But then they set up this live studio audience, and we got to talk with them about sermon preparation. And I love that they had you a part of the conversation, Lynley, because sermon preparation doesn't just affect the pastor, it very much affects the family and your wife.
I mean, if anything, it affects the home life. I mean, if you don't prioritize that, something is going to take the time of that week. And then the family sometimes can suffer at the end of the week because you have to work on it. And, you know, your son has a soccer game and you have to choose between less study or going with the family. And
not just prioritization, but also just, you know, what you choose to reveal from the pulpit can sometimes put your family in a compromised position, can be very uncomfortable. So I really enjoyed this conversation with 40 student ministry leaders to talk about how to prepare messages, but also what to share, what not to share. This was a fun conversation with a live audience. So let's roll it.
Hey everybody, welcome to Experience 24, our second session that we're going to treat a little bit of turning the tables and interview some of our friends from the Glass House in a live Glass House episode. Ben and Lynley, thanks for letting me share some time with you.
This is super intimidating. I feel like we're before the court and they're going to like issue an edict.
They all have pens and notebooks out, so we'll see. There is going to be a good record of things here. This crew has all showed up for a week at Lifeway to learn about the art of teaching and preaching to teenagers. Y'all have a lot of teenagers. Y'all have done a lot of teaching and preaching. But one of the things that we wanted to connect with you most about is a lot of the content that you've shared on your podcast weekly, which is the heart of the matter of ministry at home. One of the things that we know to be true is that sermons are never cooked up in isolation, and often a lot of the stories, illustrations, and life and things that are happening either come from home, start at home, or leak into home. And so this whole session for us isn't necessarily the specifics of how to, but where it all comes from and how we can maybe even think about the ways in which things are cultivated and shared from the time that we have at home. So before we get into some of the things about what we want to talk about, I would love for our folks here to know more about you, because we've all just been at Lifeway for the last 4 or 5 years. And so for folks that don't know you as well, maybe Lynley and Ben, would you share about how you got to Lifeway and some of the things that you've been up to?
Sure. Yeah, so we pastored 2 churches prior to coming to Lifeway. One was more of a regional church in West Tennessee, large established church with lots of staff. I got to forward a lot of email and ask people can you handle this or whatnot?
Delegate away.
And then the second church, we resigned that church and went to Denver, Colorado and planted a church from scratch, which was a completely different experience. Yeah. There was no forwarding of email.
It was to me. he forwarded it to me. Like, what should I do with this?
And so we really were like the nucleus of that. Yeah. We ended up having 65 people move with us from all over the country that were part of the launch team. But it was like us against the world, like the 2 of us. And that was a great experience. We were there 5.5 years, thought we'd be there forever. Yeah. And then God called us to Lifeway, which has been a massive change of anything we ever saw coming.
So from established church to church plant to establishment. And meanwhile, along the way, raising a bunch of kids too, right?
I'll let her tell you about them, because I forget their ages every day.
All the way, the boys and the girl. Yeah.
Okay. Well, our oldest is Ava, and she is a sophomore at UT Knoxville.
Go Vols, right?
Yeah. Well, yes. But I'm from Arkansas, so it's not totally go Vols. Yeah. Okay. She is entering in the serious dating relationship scene. So we're talking now for the first time. You're like, what's it look like to be married and all that kind of stuff. So that's interesting. But then we have sons in 12th grade, 11th grade, and 10th grade.
So the whole high school ministry. Yeah.
The whole thing.
The whole
yes.
run.
And our oldest boy is about to graduate. He's into music, guitar, all that sort of stuff. He's going to Sanford. And then our sons are 11th and 10th grade, Miles and Jack.
Yeah. And those are the tennis stars, right? Are those your tennis
They're
players?
tennis, yes. One of them is. One of them got injured at the first week of practice this year. So
not to assume anything, but tennis elbow? Is that
No,
is that
dislocated his knee.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a knee
All right,
injury.
well, that's-
Might I
seems
just say
useful,
the
tennis,
worst
yeah.
part about having 3 boys at home is we cannot agree on where to eat.
Oh, okay.
Period.
No,
Okay.
it's the food budget.
It's
Yeah.
the food
We
budget
pay
and
all the food
where
all
we're
the
eating.
places.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
horrible.
Well, I wanted to hear a little bit. I know we talked beforehand to get at some of the things because you've been a pastor at multiple places, and in this role, you've been teaching and preaching at different places. But you said before we got into anything else that you have some hard and fast rules for sermon prep, that you want everybody or anybody. Like if you had to give a quick TED talk on sermon prep, you already have the bullet points. So give it to us.
Well,
Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
get into that, but let me just set this topic up for why it's so important.
Okay, yeah.
You know, when it says in the scripture that Jesus taught with an authority that was unlike the Pharisees, we get the sense that when you're an effective teacher, there's an authority that comes with that that's unlike anything else you do. So it has been my experience that the vast amount of influence that I've been able to gain in every ministry setting stems first and foremost out of my teaching ministry. So when I'm up sharing Scripture, teaching Scripture, confessing my own struggle with Scripture, I'm gaining more credibility and getting more vulnerability with people than when I'm in a meeting with a whiteboard. So while it's easy to budget a lot of time with people around whiteboards, and I love doing that, if you sacrifice time in the Word and you're not teaching with authority, then everything else you do suffers. So the teaching ministry is like the trunk of the tree, and everything else is the branches.
More than just the preparedness or the quality of what you're doing, but the word authority resonates in a way that I think is really special.
Right.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
this is why it's really hard, I think, to be a campus pastor who doesn't teach.
Yeah.
The teaching gives you an authority with the people that you shepherd.
Yeah. It's the shepherd's voice, right? It is a chance to listen to, yeah.
Right, which is why I'm a fan of if you have a campus pastor model where the campus pastor at least gets to teach
Yeah.
once or twice a month so that the people who attend there can get to know the shepherd's voice
Yeah.
because he's the one that's really guiding them.
That teaching, guiding relationship.
Correct.
Yeah.
So whether you're in student ministry or whether you're in adult ministry, or like whatever ministry, taking the teaching seriously will cause your credibility to rise more than anything else.
More than just visibility or positional leadership, there's an authority that comes with
I mean,
teaching.
it's wonderful to have great events.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to have great one-on-one ministry, but there's no substitute for being an effective teacher.
Well, that's why all this
Yeah.
crew is here, and to the point that we're not even talking about anything else. This entire next couple days is just related to the teaching. And
Now, I
preaching.
want to say this. I'm passionate about this. She's more passionate about this than I am.
Okay.
You're very passionate about teaching.
You're going to get me in trouble, though, being a Southern Baptist. Yes. We have recently interviewed lots of different, even senior pastors, and said, hey, just tell us how you use your time.
Yeah.
And they went through their whole week, and I left, and I was like, nobody mentioned sermon prep. Like, nobody mentioned sermon prep. And I just feel like, man, the preaching of the word, when someone preaches well, I begin to trust their heart. My personality is, it takes me a long time to be loyal to someone, to trust them. And so when you give a sermon and I can tell, man, you are in the word, it doesn't have to be the best message I've ever heard, but just like, man, their heart is pure.
Yeah.
And what they're saying is rich. Then like you win someone's heart over, and then all the other things fall into place.
Well, and there's such an evidence there too. If someone you hear over and over and over again, it's really easy to hear someone for a weekend or a
Right.
camp, and it's the thing that they often say.
Their sugar stick.
The sugar stick. But the week in and the week out, it has to be an overflow of who you are, else it runs dry real fast.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
so-
right. Now, you told me to bring 5.
You said you had 5 hard and fast rules.
I
Some
got 'em.
people love a listicle, and
I got
so
'em.
for our folks that are not fastidious note takers that want to get it down early, what are your 5?
If I was going to blog,
top 5, John
my
Cusack. What are your top 5? Yeah.
tips about sermon prep, this is just what works for me. I want to make sure that's clear. Some of you are in bivocational settings. Some of you, like, you're squeezing ministry in on something else, so you have to contextualize what I'm about to say. But for me, I would not start writing a message until I had taken at least 10 pages of notes. If you start writing a message before you've really thought about the passage, you're going to be shallow. So for me, I use Logos Bible software. I would pull pieces of commentary out and begin filling up Microsoft Word pages until I reached about 10 pages. Then I would print those out. That's just how I do it.
Yeah.
And with a highlighter, I'd go back through everything I wrote down and circle the parts that moved something in me. Like, this moves me. And I found that my best messages were always the ones where they were in the crock pot longer. They just were.
Yeah. A
So
little softer on the chicken. Yeah.
So
yeah,
don't cut the study short because you're eager to get to the finish line.
Yeah. Notes before outline.
It's one of the biggest
Yeah,
temptations. It's like, you know what? I can just get this mostly here,
Yeah.
and then I'll fill in the blanks later.
Yeah. I'll fill the outline in later. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So number 2, provide the fruit of your labor, not the labor. Too many speakers that I hear, they want me to know everything they've studied.
All they learned, yes. Oh, my many books that I own and
They
read.
want to show
Yeah.
me maps
Yeah.
of where Antioch was.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Right. Have you seen this in the Greek? Let's show you. Yeah.
You have to always be thinking about the listener. It's just
Yeah.
like in publishing.
Yeah.
You have to be thinking about what keeps the reader turning the page. And when you're speaking, you have to be thinking about what's going to continue to keep people attentive.
Yeah.
So when you're just doing a running biblical commentary, you're boring.
Yeah. The verse by verse.
You're boring.
Oh, there are some seminary friends that I hope who have graduated from the verse by verse.
I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
I still love to teach verse by verse, but you need to be stopping to apply it, illustrate it.
Sorry, not preaching verse by verse, just sharing what they're learning verse by verse.
Yes,
Yeah,
without
yeah,
stopping to give people air.
Yeah.
So share the fruit of your labor, not your labor. Number 3, do not ignore the visual learners.
Especially youth in 2024. Yeah.
I am amazed how often I go and watch preachers now and they don't have a single visual. Not one.
Yeah.
You know, the old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
That's how you fill up those 10 pages.
Yes. I mean, it's amazing to me if I have one picture of from a story,
Yeah.
that's the thing people remember. They remember that picture.
Yeah.
So part of preparation is not just looking at your content, but how could I put this in front of their eyes in a way that would stick?
To show, not tell. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, if you asked almost anybody, your favorite shows are not the ones that are like, here's why you ought to like it. It's the shows that just illuminated, wasn't that a beautiful set piece? Wasn't that something moving that happened? Instead of being like, didn't you see the thing that happened? Yeah.
Especially with students, I'm less interested in putting the points on the screen because they're not going to remember any of that. But if I have at least one photo or one image that's going to stick, I definitely want to use it.
Yeah, especially when it's like the obvious ones. Like if it's Potter and clay and you don't bring a lump of clay and smash it on the table, that's just free real estate, right? That's just a Walmart trip.
What were you going to say?
You have not always been that way, though. I mean, our experience in Colorado really changed that for you.
Yeah, for sure. Like when we
from the
started,
established church to church plant, that
Oh,
was
for
that
sure.
was a
Yeah, I mean, using visuals. I mean, he would literally say in Colorado, open to this book of the Bible, it's page 1387. Because the minute someone feels uncomfortable, especially youth, then they feel awkward and they
check out.
And so we had this situation happen a couple of different times where people came and they said, you know, man, I felt uncomfortable sitting next to your third grade son who whipped open to where he was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so that evolved over time.
Yeah, and I would say this too about illustrations. Don't illustrate the obvious. If something's obvious to people, they don't need an illustration. What I like to illustrate is something that's personal.
Okay.
Like this trip I took with my family, and there's this image of us. You know, one time, one of the dumbest things I've ever done was I took my kids out on the ledge of Grand Canyon to get a picture.
Okay. Past the signs
Not
and
just
the
a ledge,
barricades.
like a long,
Like over the fence.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to do this.
Yeah.
I've now learned there's people that die doing this regularly.
You were almost a BuzzFeed article. That's great.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Well, Lynley was outside the fence crying.
With
and
the
I'm
other
like,
two.
calm down. It's just a picture. Well, then I saw the picture. And I was like, we were this close to dying. So now when I tell that story about fear and I show that picture, like that story sticks because they've got a place to put it in their brain.
Put it in their brain and connect it to you, which I think is always, at the end of the day, part of the sermon is connected to the text, but in a meaningful way, connecting to the one preaching it as well.
Absolutely.
So you're not just a cipher or an empty vessel, but you're a person that this has been true for you too. Yeah.
Yeah. Number 4, I try not to preach a message that hasn't personally run through my conviction.
Okay.
We had a episode with Paul Tripp.
Yeah.
Paul Tripp says, the best sermons are the ones where the preacher has been rescued by his preparation. So whatever text you're in, allowing yourself to do the work of the Holy Spirit to say, this is where this is intersecting with me right now. This is where it's making me feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then confessing that in the context of the sermon so that people can see that you have gospel neediness also.
Yeah. It's still good news to you, too.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not just preaching this to you all because you need it. I need it.
Yeah.
And there is almost no topic in Scripture where there's not some part of it that I'm really terrible at.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I would say this: I'm not a natural prayer. I believe in prayer. I discipline myself to pray.
Yeah.
But when I teach on prayer, I have to be humble and say this is not something that I've naturally been good at. It's an important part of the Christian life.
Yeah.
But then share some of my own prayer struggles with people about attention and how easy it is for my mind to go into the places. Like when you start saying that stuff, there's people out there like, I'm not the only one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So confessing your own struggle with the text. And lastly, I would just say oral rehearsal is part of the preparation. When I first started preaching, I was given the Sunday night service, which everybody wants.
Yeah. It's the hot demand. That's right. Prime time,
But
even. Yeah.
I took it seriously. I was like, you know what? All 5 of these people that are coming,
Right,
it's going to be
right.
good.
Yeah. 2 of them
And
needed a nap, and they took it here. Yeah.
I would slip into the sanctuary during the week, and I would turn the lights on. I would orally rehearse
Yeah.
as if I was delivering that message. Now, I don't do that as much today as I did at the beginning, but my kids laugh at me because when I'm preaching, I often like to mow the lawn that week. And
Same.
I'm preaching while I'm mowing the lawn.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're like, who's Dad talking to?
just cutting
himself.
straight
Like,
lines. That's right. From A to B. That's
he's
it. That's it.
preaching.
Yeah.
But I might have in my mind a story I want to tell, but I haven't really thought about how I want to tell it.
Yeah.
Until you hear yourself telling that story, it's hard to work out the kinks of the story.
Yeah.
That's too confusing.
What's
I need
the
to cut
actually
that part.
important part? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think too many of us walk into a teaching atmosphere with bulleted points, which is fine if that's how you work, as long as you've already talked through it
Yeah.
and thought about how you want to say it.
Yeah. So is the yard looking good this time of year?
Well,
Yeah.
he doesn't do it anymore because
Oh, okay.
we have 3 teenage boys.
Well,
but
no,
he
I
didn't.
don't preach near as
Yeah,
often
so
as
the
I
boys
used
are
to.
preaching. That's good. That's
Yeah.
good. We practice the boys.
Yeah. So those are my 5.
No, that's good. That's
Yeah.
good.
I'm surprised that you didn't say one that you always say.
Okay.
He always times a pastor when they get into scripture.
Oh,
And
okay.
he says, there's actually several things that you neglected to mention.
Well, but hold on. This is all.
A few
Now you're
pick-me-ups.
talking about.
Yeah. Let's do a couple little.
These
plus
are
ones.
just preaching maxims. I was talking about preparation.
Okay.
But as far as delivery of the sermon, I think if
Wait, so are you timing us? Like, do we need to
I
is
just
this a
think-
little exercise for us
Wait
the
a
next
minute.
time we all preach?
if a pastor starts preaching and it's 6 or 7 minutes in and he hasn't gotten to the text,
Yeah.
people are wondering how long is this going to go?
Yeah. If this is the intro.
If it's past 5 minutes, he's like, it's past 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
But not only that, I think it sets the anchor for what the authority of the message is.
Yeah.
If you're using your introduction to guide people into the text as quickly as possible,
Yeah.
that's a great introduction.
Yeah.
But when you've got 4 or 5 announcements you want to make, and one other thing you want to say before you get into the text, people are beginning to wonder: is this preaching or is this announcing? So just get right to it.
Yeah.
People appreciate that.
That's good.
Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay.
You have a couple more, though.
Well, maybe they'll come up in the
Maybe
rest
we
of our
could pick them
conversation.
up. Lindley, I had a question for you because one of the things that we had talked about before, again, seasons of this church and that church, and maybe even in the busyness now of life, sermon prep doesn't always fit cleanly inside of the 9 to 5 work schedule. Some of the things come from different things of happening in different times of hours. So how are the ways in which you as a team plot out preparation during the week? Because it feels like at some level it is a team sport. The whole family is either involved or invested in the work that is an authoritative work.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is very specific to different people. So I want to preface it with that. And I think it's different in different seasons. And so when our kids were babies, because there's 4 of them, in 4 years, when they were babies, there was a lady at our church who came to our house early to help me get them ready for school so that he could leave early, because he's a morning person. So he would leave at 6 or so to go right, for sure. That's not ideal for everybody. He wouldn't do that now. Then when we became church planters, and I really was his assistant, every Saturday morning we plotted out his week calendar. And it really, I'm very structured, kind of authoritative with time. And so we planned it out where every morning he worked on a sermon until lunchtime, and then every afternoon was time for people. Yeah. And I say that hardcore, but there's flexibility. There has to be. There's funerals. There's things that come up
But there were
that
some
you
blocks
can't
of
avoid.
time
Every
as a family.
morning.
Part of the family calendar was the preaching calendar.
Well, I mean, I was doing the family calendar and I was doing his calendar. I mean,
Okay.
so he would make a list
Eyes
of
on both.
He was like, I need to see so-and-so, this person, this person, this person, and where do I fit them in? And so he wouldn't just plug people in wherever, because if he did, he would be like, let's have someone here at 9 and someone at 2 and someone at 4. And I was like, that is ridiculous, because driving back and forth,
Yeah.
so do them at 9, 10, 11, and then
Get on
use
the
your
next
time
thing.
wisely. So we would literally go through, he's like, these are the 4 people I need to see. This is what I need to get done this week. Figure out my work week.
Yeah.
And so we would plug in, and the sermon prep was always first. Like that was just always the rule. It comes first, which was hard for him because he's an extreme extrovert, and he would be like, this is killing me because I want to go do something. And I'm like, but the church is dependent on you preaching.
Yeah.
And not you yourself, but like the Lord using you. And so that's what they need from you most. But I think it's seasonal too. I mean,
Marcus Buckingham has a book, Go Put Your Strengths to Work. And one of the principles in there is he talks about a strong week plan.
Okay.
Like your weekly plan, it has to be a strong weekly plan. And the principles he shares in there are just basic but really important in terms of put your best energy in your best slot for your most productive work.
Okay.
So
And being able to know what that is too. I
yeah,
think for a
so
lot of folks,
if
they don't
we
even
all
know.
agree that
Yeah.
teaching is the most important thing I do that affects the largest amount of people, then I'm going to put that in the slot where my best energy is going to be found.
Whether that's morning, afternoon, evening, knowing that about yourself,
Yeah.
knowing that about your work, and lining those things together.
and about your family.
And about
Because
your
the problem is
family.
if you don't do it, if things did come up, then it cuts into the family time, which is, I mean, in our situation, I was doing kids ministry. So beginning Saturday night, everyone was canceling out volunteers. So we really only had about 24, 36 hours of not working. Despite people like, don't you have 2 days off?
Right,
Whatever. And so it was very important to me for our family's sake to say, I need you to take this responsibly. Like, I need this to be important to you and get this done so that you can be attentive with our 4 kids at home.
What was one of the hardest lessons earned or learned through that season? Because I can imagine that going from maybe like an established setting into where like every hour has to be accounted for, and then having that like kind of dual focus of being both like manager of family and manager of church. Like for both of you, like what were some of the things that you learned then that maybe you still apply now?
I would say I thought it was hard then. My job now is way harder.
Okay.
Because when a congregation understands the importance of teaching, it's pretty easy to block off half your week right there.
Okay.
To say, hey, I need 15 to 20 hours.
They get it. Yeah.
I just need to block this off to be able to teach well. So to be able to say to folks, hey, I would love to meet with you. That's my teaching prep time. Could
Yeah.
we meet later? And I'd never had a single person
push back
on that,
Okay.
unless it was like a dire emergency. At Lifeway, everybody wants a meeting whenever.
Yeah,
I can't say
yeah.
I'm sermon prep.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, use that to your advantage. That like the church understands the importance of a teaching ministry.
They want you to be successful in that way.
And if you can establish some kind of common office hours of
Yeah.
like, here are the times when I study, here's the times when I meet with people, people will begin to get that and they'll respect it.
And maybe make it visible too, like that strong week plan of
Yeah.
if everybody knows that Pastor Ben's Tuesday morning looks like this, that's helpful. That's
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. Okay.
And the weeks where you have a guest speaker, which is healthy, regularly to
Yeah.
have a guest speaker, fill up your whole week with coffee with people. Like,
Yeah.
just take a break from sermon
Show
prep.
them that the
Yeah.
time is still being used.
Or
Absolutely.
use that time to get ahead.
Or get ahead.
That's
Never
where we would
wrong.
fight. That's
Never
where we
wrong.
would fight.
That's where I was going to say.
Exactly where
Yes.
we would fight. I'd be like, no, I'm
strategic, spontaneous. I see it. I see
Yes,
it. Yeah.
yes.
That's good. That's good. Well, Ben, you shared a little bit, and I want to hear from both of you because this is, I think, almost everybody in this room has got somebody else at home, kiddos, spouses. And so the question of your family is involved in the process. Sometimes they're also involved in the product.
Yeah.
As a dad of 2 small boys, when they come to camps with me and they see their picture up on the screen, they're like, what story are you telling?
Mm-hmm.
And that hit home in a way this last summer that's made me recalibrate that I run everything by them before I share it with anybody else. And so 4 teenagers sounds like an infinite repository of wonderful anecdotes. What is the process for things that can and can't be shared about family? Do y'all talk about it? Do you talk about it with them?
Yeah.
Is family off limits? Is there like a statute of like it has to be so long until? What does that look like for y'all?
Well, one of the things that we talk about in the Glass House a lot is the importance of vulnerability. And I've had to do a lot of work in my own life. I did not come from a family that practiced vulnerability, so I've had to learn this later in life that I wish I'd learned earlier. But one of the principles that I violated a lot as a teacher is that I would be vulnerable with the congregation, which that means I would share very personal or tender information that I had not shared with Lynley.
Okay.
So she is now out there with hundreds of other people
Hearing
this for the first time.
Wow.
Actually, this
Maybe we do want to unpack this. Yeah.
this came to a head one time when we were in our first church, our established church. I'm coming in. I've got car seats and babies with me, and I mean, I didn't make it to the door, and 20 people were like, "That was a great story today," and I was like, "What is the story?"
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I come in kind of blazing with him. Of course, he's trying to focus. And I'm saying, what are you telling everybody?
Yeah.
You know, what story? And so that was a marking moment where we said, okay, I want to know a little bit. But we have not done that well. And even once you've been here, you preach somewhere, and he told a story, and it twisted it to where he was kind of the hero of the story.
Okay.
But I'd had to pout for like 4 days to get an apology,
Yeah.
and he neglected to mention that.
I may have
Yeah.
summarized that in a way that wasn't
And-
totally
the
true.
lengthening and shortening of
Yeah.
time is the
Yeah, so he came off the hero.
hero's
you know,
journey, right? Yeah.
Man,
yeah,
I
yeah.
came out and I did this like 50 days of love, which turned out to be 27 days of love. And, you know,
Yeah.
all this stuff. And I was like, that was not true. Like, authenticity is a big deal. And, like, you didn't tell the truth here. And so I don't care what you share. I really don't care. Like, it doesn't bother me at all. I have no, like, shame.
Yeah.
We're all broken people. And so people are sometimes like, how do you say this stuff? I'm like, we're all messed up. So that doesn't bother me at all. But I need it to be truthful. And so if you're going to tell a story, just tell it ugly, the good, bad, the ugly.
But here's where I want to push back.
Okay, go ahead.
Since it's
Let's
a
have
safe room.
Yeah, so we're
have protection.
feisty and
When you are speaking, when you're preaching or teaching, you are making game time decisions about everything you're saying.
Sure.
You've prepared it all, but in the midst of the moment,
It's a live environment.
you're choosing because of feedback to either shorten things or lengthen things,
Yeah.
or I'm going to hang out here a little longer. And what I did that day was I was planning to say more, but I said a lot less. But unfortunately, that was probably not the best place to
to
edit.
do that. Yeah.
Because Lynley, it was a sensitive subject, and I didn't explain exactly how it all went. So to her, it was like, oh, he's painting himself out to be a better person than he is, which is called hypocrisy.
Which is the title of our next sermon. Yeah.
But I would say this: there's no one I'm more nervous to preach in front of than her.
Okay.
and I don't wear a happy face.
Okay.
So
She doesn't have this. Like,
I don't have a
taking notes
Yeah,
thing going
yeah,
on.
yeah.
I have a good friend who's
Yeah.
like this person, and I'm like just staring at him
Yeah.
constantly. So I actually do. I know that so much that, I mean, in my mind, I'm like, smile.
Smiles are earned. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's dynamics to work out in your marriage about that, because how you talk about your wife from the pulpit can be very hurtful.
And some people do care. I don't care, but some people do care.
Sure.
And you don't say much about our kids without telling them first. I mean,
I tell stories about our kids that I know that they'll
They're
think is
fine with it,
funny.
yeah.
But I remember one time I was telling a really tender story about our daughter. And I didn't think she would care. In fact, I thought it would make her look sweet.
Yeah.
But it was a sacred thing for her. Like, she wasn't ready for me to share that publicly about this moment we had had.
Yeah.
And I remember having to go and eat some humble pie
Yeah.
and tell her I was really sorry, because it made her uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like, she didn't really want the whole world to ask her about that.
Yeah. Which is like the inevitable thing, is that they don't ask you, they'll ask them, which
Yeah.
is always the
Right.
family wager. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the things that you shared, Lynley, and is part of what makes these next few days special for us, is that we are opening ourselves up to feedback. Like, everybody that's here for this event has signed on to turn in a sermon and to preach it in front of their friends, and everybody gets to write in their little feedback, and they get to hear from their little coach host, like, what they did right, what they did wrong, what they would love, what they would change. one of those built-in feedback mechanisms is usually our family. And so I would love to hear if it has been true for you, in what ways has feedback played a role in your relationship throughout time as we've grown and do? Is it something that he asked for, something freely given?
Like, we have lots to say on
I'm
this.
so curious to know. Yes.
Well, with wisdom and maturity, I've learned to buffer
Okay.
my feedback in time, not in what I say, but in time. I mean, so he's tired on Sunday afternoon, and I think that affects people different. I mean, we've known pastors who on Sunday afternoon are super energized.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everybody's different, but he is like a dead person. And so, I mean, I'd really protect him when we come home. I mean, I would tell the kids, like, hey, you know, Dad's tired. He's worked all day. We're going to be quiet. But used to, I would immediately say, you know, I'm not
Like
sure.
car ride home kind of?
Well, we didn't ride together, but lunchtime, like, lunch is good. And also, did you say this?
Yeah.
So I learned it was kind of a Tuesday or Wednesday rule. By Tuesday or Wednesday, he was ready to receive
I
feedback.
was more open to feedback.
Yeah, he's
3-day
still
rule.
not
Got
completely
it. Yeah,
open.
Yeah. Okay.
But I would even say her feedback is a lot harder to take than other people's feedback.
Okay.
Because I want her approval more than I want the average church member. So
The glad hand in the hallway. Yeah.
absolutely. So like if she's going to say something in the zone of critical, like
Yeah.
it's harder for me to process. I take it more personally.
Mm.
So we've had to work through that. You're not, go ahead.
I'm not what?
You're not naturally a person that comes home and be like, the 3 things I loved about your sermon were
Yes,
A,
I
B,
am.
and C. Like that's just not our personality.
Not a compliment sandwich.
No.
Yeah.
I have to work on encouragement.
Okay.
That's not my natural. I'm a challenger, and so it's
Yeah.
like, that was really good. But also, which I try to change. I mean, I really don't want to be that person. I want to be an encourager, especially with our sons. But one thing that's really hard is if the teaching person in a couple does not have someone who's regularly helping them, mentoring them something, it's kind of unfair because somebody does have to tell you if you're
Yeah.
doing something. So to me, sometimes it's unfair because he at times has not had a mentor, not had an accountability partner, not had an older person speaking in. I mean, he at 29 became the senior pastor and has been the lead at whatever he's done since 29 years
Since
old.
then, yeah.
And so, 18, 19 years, nobody's been over him to say, you can't do this or say this. And so a lot of times that's fallen on me, which he has not appreciated. But I mean, what I say to him, somebody has to tell you this, like iron sharpens iron,
Yep.
better wounds of a friend,
That's right.
kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And so you don't have to hear me, but I'm telling you the truth, the way you delivered this, the way you said that, whatever. But it has not always gone well.
Yeah.
So that's
it's
starting.
messy.
Well, but what you're sharing, Lynley, that's so important is that everybody's going to find feedback somewhere. And so if we're not willing to go seek out the honest feedback, it can create an unfair element to a relationship for a spouse or significant other that I'm looking for someone to say something about what I did. It either becomes really glazed over and thin, that can be artificial or inflating, or it can be harsh in places that I'm not ready. And so to seek feedback from other relationships, of a mentor, of a guide, of a friend, a colleague, is really significant. So,
I heard a pastor tell this story years ago about china that was found in his mother-in-law's attic.
okay.
She had passed away, and they found all this beautiful china that was very expensive. No one knew she even had it. And as it turned out, she didn't want to bring it out because of a couple of reasons. One was people may not value it like she values it, and they may break it. But the other one was other people may not like it like she loves it, and it would hurt her feelings. And so he talked about the tragedy of the unopened gift. And I think the problem with teaching is if you bring it out, someone's going to step on it, or someone's going to criticize it. It's an art. It's your own, it's a creative act.
Yeah, it's now outside of you, open for interpretation or debate.
Man, you talk about vulnerability.
Yeah.
So you just put something out there for a couple hundred people to throw rocks at.
Yeah.
It takes an enormous amount of
Out there with
security.
your name on it. Yeah.
And so it's a hard craft to stay encouraged in, because if you go 3 or 4 weeks when someone decides to step on it,
Yeah.
you start to ask yourself the question if you want to bring that china out anymore.
Right.
And so I do think that the spouse plays a very important role to encourage and help remind the person doing teaching that it's worth doing.
Yeah.
Because some people out there don't appreciate it. They don't appreciate it. The Glass House is executive produced by Angie Elkins, edited and engineered by Donnie Gordon with help from Nathan Howard. Show notes and production help from Nikki Ogden. Photography by Emily Bergeron and Bailey Watley. Recorded at the Lifeway Podcast Studio in Brentwood, Tennessee.